Thank you all for taking the time to join us today for the second webinar in the Growing the Ag Workforce series. My name is Meg McCosker and I'm the Agricultural Workforce Officer for Central Highlands and Central West and form part of the Queensland Ag Workforce Network. I would like to take the time to acknowledge QAWN as our funding body for this webinar and podcast series. QAWN is a government-funded industry-delivered initiative that supports agribusiness to attract, train and retain workers. So I just want to run over a few quick housekeeping rules for today's session to make it as seamless as possible. Today's webinar is going to be recorded and we'll share the link with you over the coming days, and we welcome you to revisit the content yourself or share with your colleagues. We want you to take away as much as possible from today's webinar, so do invite your questions and comments throughout. Can I please ask that all participants keep themselves on mute when Sally is presenting? And if you would like to speak during the allocated question time, to use the raise hand feature, which can be found in the reactions along the very top of your screen, the reactions and then raise hand. Keeping yourself on mute when you're not speaking will minimise distractions and noise feedback for others that are online today. We invite you to have your video on if you wish, as it's always nice for our presenters to be able to see your faces. So if you have any technical difficulties, please let me know either by just putting it in the chat or emailing meg@cheerup.org.au, and I'll do my best to help resolve it for you. And finally, if you have a question for Sally at any point, you're welcome to just type it in the Q&A or chat function, and I'll monitor and pose the questions to Sally throughout or during the allocated question time. So before we kickstart and before I hand it over to Sally to get the participation rolling, can I ask you to all pop in the chat what keeps you awake at night when it comes to leading and managing your team? It's a pretty fun question, but and there's no such thing as a wrong answer. So while you do that, I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Sally Murfet from Inspire Ag. Sally, can you please introduce yourself and lead today's discussions?
Thanks so much, Meg. Firstly, for the invitation and for helping with all this tech support. It's been a bit of a journey, but yeah, guys, if you would like to pop your videos on, I'd love to see you. As a presenter, it does make it a little bit easier to interact and engage with you. And yeah, and pop the response into the chat there where you're dialing in from today. And while you're doing that, I just thought I'd give a very quick intro into who I am if you're not familiar with me. So I am a farmer's daughter, a spud farmer and beef cattle farmer's daughter from the northwest coast of Tassie. And I've spent the last 25 years either on farm or with agribusiness companies. Prior to starting Inspire Ag, the business that I own and operate now, I was working with the state farming organisation here in Tasmania to deliver a project which was focused on revitalising skills, training and workforce development across the entire primary industry sector. I'm now based on the east coast of Tasmania, so about 50 minutes east of Hobart, but work with clients nationally. I'm on a personal mission to help farming and agribusinesses grow and optimise their business performance through the power of their people, so where all members of their team can be seen, valued and heard. And so I can see there we've got Bradley coming in from Emerald. Welcome. Yeah, reiterate Meg's comments there, Bradley, welcome. Great to have you all here today. So in agriculture, we talk a ginormous amount about attracting and retaining staff. It's a really topical issue in this industry at the moment. And in my experience with the clients that I work with, it is, I would have to say, probably the number one reason that my clients are choosing not to go ahead with expansion, because they just don't have the people to drive the investment. And I guess in fairness, this has been a long-standing issue in agriculture, and it's not something that's going to be solved overnight. So In my world, there are two environments. You have the internal environment, so that's the environment of your business, where your employment practices, your employee documentation, position descriptions, as you discussed with Jay last week, for those that were on the previous webinar, it's all the legislation that and employee relation stuff that supports a good working relationship. And it's also about how you manage the performance and conduct. If you're not dealing with that appropriately, that can cause to lead to some culture problems. And so the external environment, as you can see there, everyone's probably pretty familiar with the pestle model. I'm not going to go through them all, but the political, the economical, the sociological, those sort of things that you're looking at in an external environment. Now, for the purpose of today's discussion, I wanted to touch on 3 external environmental factors that are impacting on agriculture's ability to attract and retain talent. And I'd be just really interested in the chat, if you feel so inclined, let me know if in the last 12 months you have had challenges with attracting people into your business. So you've advertised roles, but you haven't been able to find the right candidates, or it's taking you a really long time. So just, yeah, pop a yes or something in there just to indicate what that means for you. So if you have been having significant challenges with attracting staff, then this graph here represents the reason why. So this is a graph that's come out of a report from Agricultural Appointments. It was called their 2022 Salary and Trend Report. And what it does, it looks at the number of candidates in the job market in comparison to the number of roles that have been advertised from the period July 2013 through to July 2021. And as you can see, I describe it as a set of pliers. So they're really close together when you look at July 2013, and they're pinched really quite tightly as if they're pulling out a nail or a staple out of a fence, for example. But as you move along this graph, you can see that it opens up into a big crocodile, almost like a crocodile mouth. And you can see at July 2021, there was a huge gap there. So in July 13, there was about 100 candidates in the market for about 100 jobs advertised. But you move to July 2021, and you can see that there was about 100 candidates and 425 jobs. So 4 and a bit jobs for every candidate that's in the market. That's pretty scary insight. If you add like this data hasn't been updated since this report, but if you add the context from the organisation that oversees agricultural deans in Australia, they indicate that there's actually about 6 jobs in the market for every candidate that's graduated. So it's a pretty significant challenge, and as I said before, one that we're probably not going to solve too quickly. The next one I want to talk to you about is demographics. So demographics is a really, really important external factor for us to focus on. When you look at the external graphics in Australia, our agricultural industry is, I mean, it's no secret, we're have an increasing average age. I think the last census said it was about 57 years old. In Australia, our farm managers are essentially 12 years older than any other profession across the Australian economy. And then when you look at the changing demographics, so the type of pool, the workforce pool that we have, that comprises at the moment of about more than 50% millennials. So people that are aged in their mid-20s through to their late 30s. And when you look a little bit deeper into that to understand more about the characteristics of millennials, you'll understand that, you know, this is probably a really prime time to be raising a family. The average millennial will have 5 different career changes, potentially 17 different employers throughout their working life, and they stay in a role about 2.5 years. So that old adage, that old golden adage that says, you've got a job for life. That's just not true in this current market. So if we understand our demographics, that really gives us a great insight how we can design our roles and build our culture to support one of the greatest workforce pools that we have available to us. Now, this is a bit of a busy graphic, but I think it's a really important one to show. What it's showing us is that there have been 4 industrial revolutions over a period of time. So as we have transitioned as an industry and also as an economy, transition from mechanisation through that mass production and automation, we get into this era of the Internet of Things. And I think, when you look at the evolution of the way that we lead and manage people, that's really different as well. So historically, our workforces have been rather authoritative, in that first and second industrial revolution, or carrot and stick, if you like. Or if I can say it in another way that's probably a little bit more cruder, if you don't like it, son, there's the gate. It's probably one we're more accustomed to. But our modern workforces are much smaller and they're more specialised. And this is because of the changing dynamics in our, in our industrial revolution. So it's changed the way that we farm. And so therefore we need to start looking at the way that we lead and manage our people. This is a graph that come from Agri-Food Australia. It's an organisation that's not in existence now, but I think it really does highlight how the dynamics of the composition, I suppose, of our workforces have changed significantly over a period of time. So traditionally, our agricultural workforces have been very heavily weighted towards that operator, so that the people on the ground doing the production stuff. There's been a few owners in the mix, and then there's been a few managers and a few paraprofessionals. So when I'm talking paraprofessionals, I'm talking about the agronomists and the livestock agents. So I suppose they're the type of roles that are in the business to support the business of agriculture. Bit of a mouthful, that one, but that's essentially what it's about. But as we transition towards this diamond structure, we're still going to need that technical production skill set. There's no two ways about that. But we're going to have a greater emphasis, I believe, on the softer skills. And I wish somebody would come up with a better term for it, because to me, those soft skills are often the hard skills to deal with. But it just says that relationship is going to be something that's really important moving forward as we look at how we lead and manage our teams. So looking at how you attract and train people into your business, how you develop them. For me, it's about understanding yourself. And this beautiful saying by Francis that says, first, we must understand ourselves before we can lead or help others. I think it's a really, really important ingredient as we look at how we're going to build a safe, productive, and profitable culture. Now, there's an organisation out there called Gallup where I get a lot of my research data from, and this one really stuck out to me about 12 or 18 months ago when I first came across it. And Gallup says that a manager has a 70% variance, can be positive or negative, on team engagement. And when you look at it from some of the dynamics of that, so look at factors like absenteeism, having a leader that is really self-aware and can engage a team appropriately has an 81% impact on absenteeism. So I mean that's a pretty big one in a candidate market where candidates are really hard to come by. So absenteeism, like getting the best out of your team that you have existing, is really, really important. It has a 64% impact on safety incidences. And I think, that brings into psychological safety, I suppose, into that conversation as well. And it has an 18% positive impact on productivity and a positive impact of 23% on profitability. So to me, they're pretty strong metrics as to, you know, why you would focus on yourself as a leader, to understand the impact that you have, how you think, how you naturally think, act, and communicate has an impact on those around you. And it's not just on those, it's also on the bottom line as well. So it's a pretty simple formula, really. If you've got better engagement, you get better business outcomes. I always get a bit of a laugh out of this particular slide. I think it's rather cute more than anything, but it does serve a point for the conversation that I want to have with you today. So what if I told you, going back to that naturally think, act, and communicate piece, what if I told you that the way that we, or you, naturally think, act, and communicate could have an impact on your business ranging from 30 to 200%? I'd be interested in the chat. Just type, do you believe me or not? I'd be, yeah, I think that's a good one. So if you are looking to, sorry, Meg, go ahead.
I was about to say, I have a really quick question on, do you have any suggestions, like you mentioned in the previous slide about being an engaging leader, do you have any suggestions on, if you find yourself, not find yourself in a leadership position, but if there's any tips or tricks or anything like that on how to improve your engagement with your staff?
Yeah, I would say going right back to the beginning and focusing on yourself first before you try, similar to that saying from Francis, learn to lead yourself before you lead others. So, you know, in business, and I guess in life as well, I think we often work out our rubbish on other people and then wonder why things go pear-shaped. So if this is something that's really important to you, my advice would be to get to know yourself, how you operate, and become aware of the impact that you have on others around you, and then bring your team into that. You know, you can go to go from the perspective of saying, you know, look, I acknowledge that I haven't been a great boss up until this point, or there's been some areas that I have needed to work on, and I've been doing that work, and I want you guys to hold me accountable for that. So it's about, you know, if you can't, as a leader, if you can't identify your own strengths and weaknesses and work on that, how can you expect your team to have the psychological safety to acknowledge their own mistakes as well, or weaknesses? So, you know, I think that is the very beginning of or the root cause of where you need to start.
Thank you.
No problems at all. So lost my train of thought there. Communication. There we go. Communication, back on track. I would say communication would be, I'd say it'd be the top 1 or 2 reasons why I get called into businesses to help them, because things have gone pear-shaped, and often it's because of, in inverted commas, somebody else has been the problem. I think if you foster good communication in your business, it's a really great avenue for growing and supporting a business that communicates well together. And that, I suppose, you know, if you communicate well together, then you're naturally going to grow to your full potential as well. And in my experiences, those businesses that communicate well together outperform businesses on any level or any metric that you care to throw at me. There was a Virginia Tech study done, I think it was about 2 years ago now. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to get the source if you would like it. But the study basically looked at family farming businesses, if they have quality conversations, even the prickly ones, that communicate well together, and they allow everybody that's involved in the team the opportunity to sit at the table and be involved in the decision-making process, are 21% more profitable than those businesses that don't do that. So to me, that's a pretty strong indicator as to why you would focus on developing and strengthening communication skills, particularly personal communication skills. Now, I'm going to probably go over this a little bit quickly, but DISC is one of the tools that I use in my consulting practice to help leaders understand who they are and the impact that they have on other people. So the DISC flow model says that there are 4 dominant behavioural styles. So you've got a dominant, so these people are going to be really direct, driven type of people. And just excuse me a moment, I'm losing my voice. I'm just going to get a sip. Pardon me, I'm sorry about that. So you've got a dominant influence, a steadiness, and a compliance. And so your dominant people are, as it says there on the screen, your direct and competitive and driven type of people. Your influences are your friendly, happy-go-lucky, enthusiastic, interactive type of people. Your steadiness behavioural styles are those ones that are supportive and resilient and tolerant. And your compliance people are the diligent and the accurate and the concise type of people. So they're really hard on the details. And I've heard this explained as the dominance being the powerful personalities, the influences being the playful personalities, the steadiness being the peacefuls, and the compliance being the precise. That was the one I was trying to get out. So there's a couple of different ways that you can look at about that, but that's just one model that I use, and I don't advocate that you go out and use this tool. I'm saying find something that works for you and works for your business and use it. This is just something that speaks to me, so it's one that I utilize. A quick, if you're using the DISC model, another quick way to think about it is think about this as a radar. So if you're trying to figure out who you are, think about, are you a reserved person or are you an outgoing personality? Figure out where you are on that scale, up and down. And then think about, are you a task-driven person or are you a people-driven person? And once you get those spots, that will give you a pretty good indication, a very quick and dirty one, I might add, of where you might sit in that. So I'm not gonna go into these today, just in the interest of time, but I do want to play you this fun one. And this is about, this sort of, I guess, is a fun way of saying, of showing you how, well, the importance of communication. If you get the pitch right, then everything else will take care of itself.
Hey mate, just wondering if you could show me how you call the cattle up.
Yeah mate, no worries.
What call do you use?
Well, you got your cameers, your camors, your kabars, your kabop-bops and your hoo-hoos.
Your hoo-hoos?
Your hoo-hoos.
Which one today?
Well, it is a Thursday. We're in the AM and we are on planet Earth, so we'll go with the camoo.
Camee.
Lower.
Moo.
Higher.
Moo.
What are you?
Moo.
Me.
Bet.
So yeah, a little bit comical,
Hey mate,
but
just wondering if you could...
yeah, I love the way that, you know, they have a bunch of different ways to call the cattle. The camee doesn't work, the camoo doesn't work, and they're patting the phone to the cows and they're just sitting there grazing. Obviously the message is not getting through, but the moment that they get the pitch right, you know, those cows start to move in the direction that they want. So the next I want to talk about with you guys today is culture. And so this is another study that came out of the MIT Sloan Management Review recently that says employees are 10.4 times more likely to quit a bad culture than leave for money reasons. You know, we talk a lot about culture in agriculture, but, you know, as a consultant, I describe it as kind of like the baling twine that keeps everything together, and there are others out there that describe it as the privilege of staying in business. So this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, this particular slide, but how to ruin a good culture. You hire a star performer, you ignore their behaviour, you ignore the negative impact on other people, and then you wonder why people disengage or resign. That's essentially what the culture cycle is. Culture is what you believe as a leader, it's how you behave, and it's how you decide about things. And I think it's also, just to add to that a little bit, I suppose it's also about what you tolerate and how you manage underperformance in your business. Because if you don't manage that, you're essentially drawing a line in the sand to say that this is a tolerated or an accepted way of behaving around here, when in fact it might not be at all. Generational drivers, I would say, probably would be, it'd have to be the top reason that I get called in to support farming businesses. And when I'm invited to the table, it's really interesting to witness the conversations, because the older people are saying, look, the younger generation are just lazy and self-centered and entitled. And then on the flip side, the younger generation are going, the older generation are just dinosaurs and they're stuck in their ways and they're controlling. And so my message is, look, don't gossip about each other. If we actually take the time to understand the richness of experience and perspective that each generation brings to our businesses, then we're going to get a workforce that is much more productive. We're going to get much more participation in our workforce or in our teams, but we're also going to be more easily able to meet our business objectives at the end of the day. If you're interested in this particular graphic, I'd encourage you to go to McCrindle and type in McCrindle generational drivers into Google, and it'll take you to a page that will give you a much more in-depth description of the generations and what's influenced them. So the Great Resignation is something that has been playing out in the US. That's been happening since the impact of COVID, really. And at the start of the year, experts were saying that there was going to be something like greater than 40% of the US workforce were going to be looking for new roles. So essentially what was happening over there was that people were taking less pay, less responsibility, just so that they could get some work-life balance back into their lives. So they had this period of downtime where they've been able to reassess and reevaluate what's important to them in life. And they've come back and said, look, give me less pay and less responsibility, and I'll still be involved in the workforce, but I just need to get some balance back in my life. Interestingly, at the National Farmers Federation conference in, I think that was April this year, one of the presenters there presented some data from ABS that said that for the first time since records have been kept, that the city population had declined and regional population had actually increased. So you might think this is all happening in the US. It's got nothing to do with us and our regional or our agricultural workforces. But I'm here to challenge you to say that looking at what the trends are saying is really important for us in designing our workforces and our culture. Going back to that original statement that I said, because it can actually present as a pretty unique benefit for us as an industry if we understand what the needs are of our employees or our future employees, so that we can tailor something that's going to hit the money for them. One of the things that really strikes me in the ag sector is looking at the trends when it comes to promoting a role. A lot of farming businesses in particular will start at that recruitment advertising piece. So they will be going, right, we've got a gap in our workforce. How are we going to bring somebody in? Let's put an ad in the local paper or the local farming paper and see what we can attract from that. But what I'm suggesting is that as an industry, we need to be far more focused on that employer branding piece. So understanding what it takes to be an employer of choice, and really understanding what the employee value proposition is of your business. So if we understand that, we're going to get better applicants, we're going to get better hires. It's going to save us a lot of time and money in recruiting the wrong people into our businesses. And that's really important, because there is data out there in the HR world that says that the average recruitment process can take anywhere between, I think it's $18,000 and $24,000. That's a big sum of money. And so if you're going through this process and you're hiring the wrong person and they're only staying in your business for 6 or 12 months, that's a big investment, because essentially it can take you up to 12 months to get somebody to replace somebody in your business and bring them up, that new person up to speed. So this for me is a really, really important one. So if you don't know what your employee value proposition is, a very high level way that you can look at it is understanding what return on investment an employee is going to get for their skills, their capabilities, their experiences, I suppose, that they bring to your business and to the role that you might have on offer. But if you don't know that, ask the people that you have currently. Ask them questions like, what attracts you to coming to work for this business? Why do you stay? Why do you stay here? And what do you value the most about working with this business? And that will give you some insights into help you building that employee value proposition. This is this little advert. This has come out of a New Zealand newspaper. I think it was about 8 or 10 years ago, but it still cracks me up to this day. So yeah, stockman required 24 hours a week to feed bulls, must be a non-smoker, wear his hat with the peak to the front, be capable of wearing his pants around his, I'll just beat that one, not his knees. Also needs to be able to divorce himself of his phone for more than 2 hours at a time. This may turn into a permanent role. It gets me every time. And I love the one down the bottom as well. Labour required to help pour 800 cubic metres of concrete, can be a smoker but won't have time. I think that's this is all very tongue-in-cheek, but I think, just to look at this a little bit more deeper in our current environment and looking at the language around how this particular advert has been structured. So if you look at this from a diversity and inclusion point of view, like if a female was to read this ad, they would be probably going, well, this person, might be stuck in their ways of, an older generation that doesn't value the contribution of a female. There's so much that you could read into this. And what I'm actually really encouraging my clients to look at is implementing more video into their recruitment campaigns. So if this works, I'm going to show, this is like a 4-minute video. I'm not going to show you the whole lot, but I just want to give you an example of a person that is here in Tasmania, where I come from, not a client, so there's a disclaimer there. But what I really love about this piece is how they've been able to show so many different aspects of the business, bit of an insight into the culture, bit of an insight into how they operate as leaders, but also, the types of assets and machinery that you'd be operating if you were to become the successful candidate of this role that they have on offer. So I'll just play you a quick snapshot of it and, just give you a bit of an insight.
Hello, I'm John Ramsey. My wife and I own Ramsey Agriculture, which is a farming business which has a couple of farms in Tasmania, one at Bothwell and one at Bridport, and we are looking for a cropping manager. At Bothwell we have about 550 hectares of irrigation, a mix of pivots and linears, which under that we grow around 80 hectares of potatoes this year and about 80 hectares of poppies. We've increased the productivity of Ratho a lot in the last 20 years through irrigation. We'll finish at Bothwell around about 10 or 11,000 lambs a year under irrigation fodder system. In the job ad, we talk it's a bit of a cropping manager, cropping operations role, because we can be flexible. I can sort of step into the role to help out if need be, in a trainee position, or if someone's fully qualified and experienced, I can step out and find some other things for me to do. So currently have Ryan in the role, good young fella. Unfortunately, he's leaving to head to the mainland for greener pastures, a bit of a change.
I've been at Ramsey Ag since 2014. As a young 20-year-old, I came here. So I've been here nearly 7 years now. What I like about Ramsey Agriculture is that you have the real career path you have and the progression you can do to learn and to develop as a person, and that each day is different, very diverse in what we do, always looking to improve, very progressive in what we do, always looking for a different crop or a different way to do things. So I'd recommend the job to someone. It's a very good career pathway.
I'm not going to play the rest of that, but I just wanted to show you an example of how incorporating video into your recruitment campaigns doesn't have to be a really highly polished type of professional production. This was clearly something that was done on an iPhone and probably even edited on an iPad. But yeah, just even the picture clarity that you can get out of that from using your iPhone out in the paddock to capture some data and some insight. And so, there's a lot that I can take from that particular video in terms of what the culture is like there. What are the they're operating highly sophisticated and new equipment, so you're not going to be put on some rust bucket out the back of the plane somewhere, and so there's lots of things from a personal safety side of things as well that you can get out of something like this. So you look at this particular approach in comparison to old mate who wanted somebody 20 hours a week to feed bulls, and they're a complete contrast to each other. And so I think in this market, in a candidate-driven market, it's just so much more important to look at, how you attract the right people into your business. Go ahead, Meg.
I was just wondering, so obviously we've seen two very different ends of the scale. As someone who, like for instance, Nicole put in the chat that they've just employed their first employee, and so far so good, so that's fantastic. For those that are still in that, I guess, recruitment process, do you have any, and they haven't had a lot of hits on ads and things like that, do you have any tips on potentially restructuring the ad and making sure you're hitting the key topics, or whether they should try and do a bit of a short video on this is the culture? Because with that video, it's very transparent with what you're getting into, which I think is really beneficial. So can you achieve that in a text ad, or what are your thoughts, Sally?
Oh, look, I think that a text ad and a video ad are not exclusive of each other. I think it's something that needs to be incorporated into the marketing mix, if you like, when it comes to recruiting or attracting and promoting a role. Promoting a role and attracting candidates to it. What I'd really suggest, I scour the job ads quite regularly just to see who's out there in the marketplace, who's recruiting, who's continually recruiting. I look at those sort of ads and go, wow, there's something going wrong here. They're a small business, but they've advertised 5 times in the last 18 months. What's going on here? Are they going through an expansion phase? Is there a really big culture problem here? And candidates are doing that as well. They're keeping an eye out on what the market is doing and what opportunities are available. So if you've had a job ad up and it's not tracking the way that you thought it should be tracking, one of my suggestions would be to take it down and have a bit of a review of what that advertisement is, and give it to somebody else that has nothing to do with your business, and ask them to read it and give the feedback that they might give. Because what I find quite often is that job adverts, they're very focused on the employer, and in this market we need to be much more focused on the employee. So what are we actually offering the employee in exchange for their time? obviously there's an exchange of time and money, of course, but in exchange for their time and their effort and their ethics, what are they actually getting out of becoming an employee of your business? So yeah, really, I've done that with a few clients, and they've had 2 or 3 applicants that have been okay with the original ad, but once they've changed that and had much more of a focus on understand who the employee or potential employee might be, and what are their drivers and motivators, going back to that original slide of generational drivers and understanding what's important to this particular generation, what gets them up of a morning, what keeps them awake at night, and structure your advert around that. Does that clarify your question, Meg? Perfect.
Yes, thank you.
All right. One of my favourite topics of all time in HR and the ag world is employee engagement, and this is something that I could literally talk about for 2 days on end. Engaged employees, these are the ones that show up every day. They've got energy, they've got enthusiasm, they've got passion for everything that they do in your business. By contrast, if you've got an employee in your business who's disengaged, then you're going to basically going to be getting a person that only does enough to stay off the boss's radar. So you can see that dotted line on the bottom there. That's the minimum standard, and they're not doing much more than the minimum standard or what is expected of them to remain engaged with that particular business. So an engaged employee is the one that is going to, essentially they're going to be probably the first one through the gate of a morning. They're probably going to be looking for ways that they can improve the productivity and performance of their team. What errors can they fix up, or how can they position their fellow colleagues to get the most out of their day? They might be sweeping the workshop floor or running the grease gun over the machinery before the start of a day. That is an engaged employee. And so some of those figures that I alluded to originally about the 30 and 200%, this is where this comes into play. If you've got an engaged employee in your business, the difference is discretionary effort, and that's 30%. So that's that gap there. If you have to replace an employee and bring a new one up to speed, replace the employee that's been disengaged and bring a new one up to speed, that can cost you anywhere between 30 and 200% of that particular role's annual salary. So to me, like that's some pretty stiff numbers around why this is something that's really important. And I think this is a difficult topic to talk about, because employee engagement is probably something that you can certainly see it from a cultural perspective, but it's harder to get the solid data to support what's going on with employee engagement. Because it doesn't necessarily show up as a line item in your balance sheet, for example. So some very simple and basic ideas around building employee engagement would be, looking for opportunities where you can meet with your team, maybe a team lunch or a smoko. An impromptu one is always good. Looking for opportunities where the individual that's filling a particular role in your team can have a contribution beyond what they're paid to do. Celebrating birthdays and milestones is always a really good one, and anniversaries as well, work anniversaries. But even just a simple thank you, I've heard a simple thank you or a positive comment being described like an emotional bank account, like just saying thank you to somebody and recognizing the contribution that they've made to your business or a particular task on a day can essentially last, it can last about seven times. So if you think about in terms of, if you've got 5 different, sorry, I didn't do a really good job of explaining that one. Let me start that one again. So the emotional bank account, if something positive happens, $1 gets deposited into the bank account. If something negative happens, $7 gets deducted from the bank account. So you can see that it can take 7 different positive interactions to make up for a negative one. And for some people, that can actually be a really exhausting process. So the scarf model is something that, people ask me all the time, what do people want? And, I know we're getting a little bit pushed for time here now, Meg, but I just really want to touch on this. So the scarf model is about understanding a person's status in the business, their certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So just think of those acronyms when it comes to, thinking about what's happening in your business, what's the culture like, why are you getting performance issues? Often if you've got challenges in your business, going back to this model and going, well, what's missing for this individual? Are they not getting the autonomy that they need? Am I being a micromanager, for example, and trying to control every single aspect of their role? Because if you look at going back to the characteristics of a millennial, these are the sort of people that want autonomy. They want autonomy to do their role that leads towards a bigger outcome. So just something to keep in mind. Now, I wanted to touch on this one here because a modern employment relationship, to my mind, it goes beyond the exchange of time and money. So employees want to feel like they're contributing again towards that bigger picture. So there are three, in HR theory, there are three contracts involved in an employment relationship. You've got obviously your employment relationship, so your employment contract, your policies, your procedures, those sort of things. You've got a social contract, so making sure that the culture is right, that you do what you say you're going to do, those sort of things. And then there's a psychological contract. So the mother, or I call her the grandmother of psychological safety, says, and that's Amy Edmondson, she says that psychological safety is basically a shared belief that the team is safe for taking interpersonal risk. So they're not going to be reprimanded for challenging the status quo, pointing out mistakes, having a diversity of opinion, or shining a light on a weakness of a system or process, or potentially even an individual. And I want to give you a very quick story, a real life story of where psychological safety wasn't in this mix and where things went pear-shaped. So I got a phone call from a client about 3 years ago now, and basically the conversation went, Sally, I need you at my kitchen table at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I need to sack a bloke. And I'm like, oh my God, what's happened here? I was involved in the recruitment process of this individual, and all the reports up until this point were overly glowing. So I was really at a loss as to what had gone wrong in this particular relationship. So as I sat there at the kitchen table of that client for around about an hour while I listened to them and they gave me their dish list of everything that was wrong with this particular employee. They were lazy, they were avoiding conversations, they were getting long emails and text messages late at night, despite having provided them with written instructions via an app. Because we're talking two separate properties here, about an hour from each other. And as I sat there and listened to them, I started to formulate, process in my mind what was going wrong. And after the end of that hour, I asked them one question that changed the entire course of that conversation. And I said to them, have you ever considered that this particular employee has challenges with reading and writing? And there was like a really long and awkward silence, and the husband just about dropped his cup of coffee on the floor, and I'm glad he didn't, because it was a tile floor and it would have made a hell of a mess. But he said it was like this slap in the forehead moment for them, because they had a child in a private education system who had challenges with reading and writing. So they had all the tools and resources, they knew the signs, but they didn't see it, and it was literally right underneath their nose. And if we go back a few steps in the story, I'd actually been working with these clients on doing a 360 degree review process with their team. So if you're not familiar with what a 360 is, it's basically the opportunity for everybody that's involved with the team to have a say about what's going well, what's not going so well, and how as a team you can bridge the gaps. And that is of themselves and the whole team. And so when I do a 360, I give the people that I'm interviewing a one pager, which is just a page to keep notes on, record any actions that might need to be taken as a result of that conversation. And as I sat there in the shearing shed with this particular employee after we'd had that conversation with the employer, and I slid this piece of paper across the shearing shed table to the employee and asked him to write his name on top of that piece of paper. His own name, 5 letters, 2 of the letters were the same, a very simple name. His hesitation in actually writing his name in front of me was enough to confirm that this was, in fact, we were on the money with this particular challenge. As I sat there with the employee to understand from their perspective what was going on, for the most part, what I learned was that the employee was, the behaviours that the employer was experiencing was essentially coping mechanisms for the employee. And so the employee actually showed me a text message that he'd sent the boss the night before, and he showed it with the message on the phone. He said, "How long do you think it took me to write this particular message?" And I was sort of thinking, maybe 5 minutes by the time you drafted the message, simple 6-line message. There was nothing too complicated about it. And he said, "Look, that message actually took me 25 minutes to write." So what he divulged to me was, in fact, that he could read and write, but his proficiency, he felt that he was doing the best thing by the employer by picking up the phone and asking those questions, and getting on with the job to the best way or the best of his ability. But as a parent, what he told me next will probably stick with me for a very long time. It literally broke my heart. He said that despite being on the property and the shearing shed being literally 400 metres from the homestead where he lived, what he would do is he would take his lunch every day, and he would make sure that he didn't return home until after 7:30, because he knew by that time that his children would be in bed and that he wouldn't have to read them a story. So what he told me after that was that what he would do is sit down with his wife, and he would go through the text messages and the emails, and essentially he would be downloading to his wife the information, and his wife would be drafting up the emails and the text messages and sending them to the employer. So hence why the employer was getting text messages and emails late at night. So essentially what we have here is 2 parties with the very best of intention for each other, but the behaviour and conduct were contradictory to what they thought was best practice. So I wanted to leave you with that story, but as I wrap up, I want to leave you with a couple of other thoughts, and that is that to my mind, success shouldn't be entirely measured by the number of hours that you spend in the paddock or in the orchard or whatever your enterprise base is. It shouldn't be just about the yields that you achieve or the dollars that are in the bank at the end of the day. It should be about the relationships that you enjoy. So if you're focused on increasing the performance and profitability of your business, I think it's really essential to focus on 3 things. The first is understanding yourself. That's the self-leadership piece. Learn to lead yourself before you try and lead others. The second is hire the right people and get out of their road. I have a saying in what I do that if you are the smartest person in the paddock, then you're probably in the wrong paddock. And the third, and I think most important one, is value the whole person, not just the part that makes you money as an employer. So in a nutshell, I believe that people are the power of agriculture, and if you take care of your people, then your people will take care of the profitability and performance of your business.
Thank you, Sally. That was absolutely fantastic and very touching story at the end. It's I guess a good reminder that they're very like what's impacting you might not be impacting someone else, but they might have things going on in the background that you have to be aware of. So it's always important to, I guess, consider other things, or as you say, communication is so important. have that conversation with them, because even though that person couldn't necessarily read or write, if he was open to having a conversation, they could have avoided all of those issues that they experienced, which is very important. So before we wrap up, because I've only got a few minutes left, does anyone have any questions for Sally? If we don't get to them today, we will get to them in the podcast. So please just pop them in the chat, or you can email them through. I think one of my main takeaways from the your webinar today, Sally, is how much the getting that employee part right is really important to having a profitable business and making sure, because without the people that support our business, the business doesn't move forward. So having all of that together is very, very, very important.
100%.
So I think if there's something Sally and I have spoken about previously also, is if there's any resources that you would like, I guess, or think that would be valuable or beneficial to your business, please either reach out to Sally. You can see her email there, sally@inspire-ag.com.au, or myself, and we'll do our best to get those resources to you. Sally is a encyclopedia when it comes to this thing, so she'll be able to find the right resources that suit your needs. So with that, I think we're 2 minutes out, so I'll just wrap up and tie it all neatly together. So thank you, Sally, and everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. We really care about your opinion, so we will be sending out a post-webinar survey with the webinar recording, and we'd really appreciate you taking the time to complete it. On that survey, we also have a question for any questions, asking you to put in anything that you would like Sally to talk more about in the podcast episode. So if you would like her to talk more about strategies to attract, train, and retain, or touching more on the SCARF model and how that works into your business, or the DISC model and how to implement that into your business, please send that through. As I just mentioned, we are recording a podcast very shortly after this, and those will come out over the next couple of weeks. The podcast is called the Cheer Up, Reset and Rethink podcast, and can be found on all of the podcast streaming platforms, and we'll share the link once it is live. Finally, there is one more webinar in this series, which will be held next Wednesday, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m, and that's all about workplace health and safety in agriculture, which I will also send the link out to register if you haven't already in the email with the recording and the survey. So with that, if we're all happy, obviously you touched on everything very well, Sally, because we haven't had a question pop through yet, but we will be able to dive more into the themes in the podcast anyway. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and we will be in touch soon.